Thank you, Professor Yip, for sharing your view and the interesting but important statistics. I hate to rush the speaker, but we have a time limitation. Okay. So we will have the following two speakers, our Professor Ng and Professor Yu. Okay, right. Professor Ng first, right? Okay. Now I know they have a lot to say, but we are being mean because they are our own colleagues, so they can speak not more than 10 minutes. So.
Thank you, Professor Leung. Okay, 10 minutes, so not much time, so I'll start. What I'm going to talk about is perhaps a little bit different from the previous speakers. I'm not going to give you a lot of statistics and numbers, but some food for thought, basically. Well, as you can see here, I think population, according to the United Nations, is the most important factor affecting sustainable development. And I think Paul's conclusion, is so true that it's like, the hour arm of the clock. And I I think that is a very good continuation. I want to add some arguments, to substantiate that argument. And if we look at population as a very important factor for sustainable development, then population cannot be seen as just a driver of economic growth. And I think we've heard about that argument many times over this afternoon. What I want to argue is that population actually should be the targets for the pursuit of sustainable development. And how can we do it? We do it through integrated policy making. Now, if I said that, then I will get myself into trouble in a sense, because like just now, Mr. O'Reilly, he mentioned 2 times, like, are we going to put people in the warehouse, or are we going to grow vegetables? Or are we going to have more economic growth in order to have resources to take care of the elderly? And I think those are value issues. And we need to sort it out. And if we don't talk about it and we're just focusing on the figures, we could be in trouble if we really are serious about looking at population as targets of policies to promote sustainable development. Now for the facts, I think we heard a lot about the facts. And in fact, I think later on Everett will talk about all these scenarios, give you the numbers and do the projection and tell you that if you import that much labor, there will be that much more land and housing requirements. We also need to sort out values, like what I just mentioned. How are we going to look at population as human resources? Are we just economic animals? Or we're talking about, building a particular, type of population that is going to, be sustainable and also make Hong Kong a fun place. And we are not just, workers and we're just not pushing economic growth. We do that, but we do something else, like promoting social justice, environmental sustainability. If we are serious about that, we also will put ourselves into deep trouble, like Dr. Kenneth Tan mentioned about the need to have all these, interrelated policy areas that we have to really look into and see how these policies can reconcile, with one another at different geographical levels. So what I'm going to do is, I will just take you through some pictures and photos, and I'll kind of try to take you through my thoughts about looking at the photos and then think about what kind of policy issues are at stake, if we are talking about having population policies for sustainable development. Okay, now what I have is actually very simple. I don't have all these magic numbers that Paul has just shown. Now these are the key measures talked about in the consultation documents. All right, so we heard a lot about this this afternoon. Now these are some of the dimensions, I would say key dimensions for sustainable development, policy areas which are central to promoting sustainable development. And when we look at population, I think we need to look at it in a more integrated manner. So it's not just individuals having certain skill sets or education levels or whatever. Everyone goes through life cycles. Some of us go through all these, like a full life cycle. Some people skip it. Some people are married but they don't have kids. Some have kids and then go through this teenage period and then having their kids leaving home and then they enter old age, live a full life, become grandparents, etc. Now I think we have to have that mentality in mind. If we think about that, then we have to think about policies which will nourish these families, in our city, and that will include education, retirement, jobs, diversification, etc., etc. Now, if we have a family like this, well, I'm not sure that's a family, an adult, and you can tell from his living environment, it's not very desirable. Now, if we're talking about population policy, just focusing on these 5 aspects, what do they mean to this person? Well, I don't think he needs to worry about, mismatch of, skills, or attracting global talent. He probably would have no relationship about that. But if you're talking about importing low-skilled labor, that might affect his economic status. I don't know, But of course, if we are looking at population policy from a sustainable development perspective, what this person needs most is actually housing, a better environment, job security, improvement of, quality of life. Similarly, for this family, well, this kid's probably watching TV or whatever. Again, if we look at these suggested policies in the document, what do they mean for them? Well, education seems to be very important, but they probably are too young because these are talking about university level education. Look at this grandma or old lady, and in such a cramped condition, she probably cannot really age at home. And if that's the case, eventually she needs certain healthcare facilities. But aging here is only talking about silver hair market. It actually doesn't really talk about aging facilities. In the document, it says other units are actually taking care of other policy areas, and so the document is not focusing on it. But in a way, if we are really serious about promoting sustainable development, somehow the government needs to tackle these issues, the relationship of various policy areas somewhere, if not in this document or in this occasion, but that needs to be tackled. How about this family? I think the previous speakers talk about it. Families like this, for them, population policy is really how to retain them, right? So to them, we are not talking about how to attract global talent. I mean, this obviously very wealthy family, all right? In the document, it says the youth population actually had an unemployment rate of 9.7%. Well, I'm sure these youngsters, when they continue to study, etc., they probably will go to the best universities, in the world. They don't need to worry about unemployment. The question is that will they stay in Hong Kong? Do we have the environment to retain them? All right. Okay, university students. We talk about mismatch of skills, and I think I really feel like my students or our students, they are very talented, but somehow the education system doesn't really inspire enough passion and vision in them. And when those who have the vision and passion, they probably feel very frustrated when they get out of the city. If they want to try something new or something creative, the economic regime doesn't really allow them to do that much. If they want to have a little shop doing their own work, it's very difficult to find a place given the very high land price in Hong Kong. The document also talk about increasing labor force. I mean, look at this person who's in wheelchair. I think, well, it's very good if we can also include them to boost the quantity of labor. But we all understand that for physically challenged individuals, our city is actually a very difficult place for them to navigate. So it's really not just looking at them as workers or potential workers. Can we provide an environment which allow them to really navigate in the city, and also culturally that we really accept them as capable individuals. And I think culturally our city still need to work very hard. And look at this old lady at the back. What will happen when she grows older? So this household will have 2 persons who need to be taken care of. Okay, farming again. So yes, a lot of people in Hong Kong like to choose alternative lifestyle. All right, so there are families who really want to do that. Again, it goes back to the value issue. And farming is a kind of employment as well, all right? And it spins off other economic benefits and social benefits and environmental benefits. So it relates to the kind of economic policy that our government, would like to steer, if, any. And I think, that's a value issue that we need to further discuss. Right? So this is another picture showing that when we talk about aging, we can't just focus on the silver hair market. In Hong Kong, I think we have more urgent issues to deal with when it comes to aging, like this old lady. We are talking about retirement benefits, we are talking about family support, public finance. Eventually when she gets older, it might be healthcare policy. Okay. Now, if we're talking about importing more workers, they are not just workers, they are human beings. So they don't just come to work, all right? So it's very unhuman to think that way. So ethically, when they come to our city, they should be part of us, and they need all sorts of facilities. So our domestic helpers spending their holidays like this, how about them if they come, if more of them come? How are they going to spend their spare time? Are we going to lock them up, and do all the work? And if that's the case, then what will be the impacts on various policy areas? So I'm sorry, I hope I do not sound too critical, but I think what I want to say is that if we are really serious about having a population policy that promotes sustainable development, that it's really very important for us to have a holistic understanding of the implications, and also look at the various policy areas and see their connection. Because I think after all, we are not just economic animals. Well, of course, economic activities are still very important, and I think if we don't have a good job, it's very difficult to raise a healthy family. And raising healthy family is never, a cheap, enterprise. Like importing, workers, Mr. O'Reilly said it's very expensive for employees, employers. It's also very expensive for our society. So I think, to sum up, like what I've said so far, is that if we really want to raise, healthy families in our society, it's very important for us to think about integrated policies that promote economic growth, but also social justice as well as environmental sustainability. Unless we start from there and think of creative solutions, tapping into not just relying on the government or the markets, but also I think Paul also mentioned that, like in Japan, in other places, people are very much organizing communities and asking communities to contribute to satisfying their needs as well. So I think those are the areas that we really need to go into and pay serious attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ng. Okay, our last but not least speaker, another data cruncher with a professional view. Professor.
Thanks, Coach. How many minutes do I have? Okay, so indeed, Hong Kong workers are very flexible. I can finish the talk, say, in 5 minutes or 10 minutes, if you like. But our contention is indeed a very relevant but simple one. When you are asking people to make a choice, you have to provide the consequence, the implications, so that we can make a good choice. And more importantly, afterwards, after making the choice, say 5 years later or 10 years later, we can make an evaluation. So without telling the public what would be the consequence, what would be the implication, but force you to make a choice, very likely we would make a wrong choice. And even worse, 10 years later, we have no ground, no basis to make any evaluation and make any improvement to move forward. So that's why today my topic is very simple. What would be the implications of the proposed population policy? But because I am a housing and land researcher, so the implication would be focused more on land and housing policy issues. But before that, indeed, many speakers have mentioned about the importance of the increase of working population. No matter by importing labor, by immigrants, or by encouraging more active participation of our citizens. But the point is, by means of increasing population so as to bring economic growth cannot be sustainable. Just like what a former UN demographer has mentioned, it can even be a Ponzi demography or a bubble of population if you would like to achieve economic growth simply by means of increasing population. So indeed, say for example, in Singapore, the government has just produced an economic strategy report, which they have already mentioned they would abandon this approach and they would focus more on enhancing productivity, because they know that it will be very difficult to increase working force. So instead of relying solely on increasing population to bring economic growth, they have changed their direction. They have a policy on economic strategy in the coming future to rely more on improving productivity rather than increasing population. So why we, Hong Kong, have to do the same mistakes again? So this will be one of the major issues before we make any choice or conclusion. And then the coming will be tables and figures about the implications of the population policy on land and housing supply. So in order to let the public to make a good choice, I think the government have better to provide some scenario and tell the consequences and the implications of such a scenario would have. So say for example, just for illustration, today I have prepared 3 scenarios. Scenario A is the baseline case for comparison, and scenario A is exactly what would be the situation projected by the document in case we do nothing. So it means the current population working force would drop after 2016. That's the baseline case. But then, how about if we agree with the government? So scenario B is a steady case. That means after 2016, reaching the peak of the workforce, then how can we keep a steady, right? Maybe this diagram can tell you better. Right? The blue line is the baseline case, scenario A. That means, according to the projection of the document, after 2016, after reaching the peak, then the working force would drop substantially. Then scenario B, scenario B will be a steady case. That means, after reaching the peak in 2016, then by whatsoever means, then try to achieve a steady level of the workforce. While scenario C refers to a linear growth model, right? In my scenario illustration, I assume a 0.5% per annum linear growth. So that is the 3 scenario case. And the point I would like to illustrate is, according to different scenarios, what would be the implications on housing and land needs? So this would be the summary. And indeed, I can finish after this slide if time is not allowed. Scenario A, the baseline case, according to the long-term Housing Strategy Steering Committee report published last week. Then, in the coming 10 years, they promised to build 470,000 housing units so as to accommodate the requirements. Or it means about 490 hectares of land. So indeed, I chat with Doris before the start of the seminar. Why don't we have the population policy public engagement before the long-term housing strategy steering committee consultation? So now when the long-term housing strategy steering committee, estimated that we need 470,000 housing units, to be built in the coming 10 years, but then suddenly the population policy, asks for more. So what can they do? So scenario B would tell you what would be the consequence. And I subdivide scenario B into 2 situations. Scenario B1, assuming that we can encourage our local citizens to become more actively to participate in the working, in joining the working force. So they're assuming that 50%, only 50% of the difference, to be provided by import labor or by immigrants. Then, according to my estimation, then you will find that indeed we need 27,600 more housing units, or it means about more 50 hectares of land. But then, just in case, if we relied 100% import labor, then you will find that indeed we are asking for almost 10% increase in housing supply and land supply. So whether we really can have such an increase in land and housing supply is a question mark, especially when the long-term housing strategy steering committee report have already been finalized. And another worst case is scenario C, if we would like to keep a growth in our workforce. And here the assumption is just 0.5% per annum linear growth, a very modest growth rate. Then take a look, we need 30% increase in housing and land supply. It's a huge difference. So if you are interested in about all the figures and assumptions, then you can take a look from our homepage to see my assumptions, and for scenario A, scenario B1, and B2, and C. Okay, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.